Welcome to Little Big Thumbs. My name is JP, aka Big Papa Thumbs. And in this video today, we are going to be looking at two variant modes of Power Plants. Now, Power Plants is a game that is currently, at the time of this recording, on Kickstarter, and you can find a link to that campaign in the description of this video. If you are curious to have a close look at the components or the core gameplay, I'd recommend that you take a look at the first video we did on Power Plants, which I will also link in the description to this video. Now, as for the two variants we're going to be looking at today, the family or the training mode of Power Plants is the first one we'll look at, where you can bring younger or inexperienced players to the table and experience this game. And the other one is the solo mode that will be included in the final production copy of Power Plants. Now, with all that being said, I think it might be a good time to now take a look at the table. All right, so here we are. We are all set up for a two-player game of Power Plants. The reason we're set up for two players is because that is also the setup for this solo game. But before we get to the solo game, let's take a quick look at how to play the family or the training mode for Power Plants. And what you're going to do, we've got our row of 5 plant cards here, and each of those have a sprout action and a grow action. And what we're going to be doing is taking the extra plant cards that we're not using, and we'll be using those to cover up the grow actions so that we have just those sprout actions visible in the game. We're always going to have 2 tiles in hand, and you're going to choose one of them to add to our garden here. And instead of having a choice between using the sprout action or the grow action, you're just going to take advantage of that sprout action. Let's just take a quick turn to show you what this looks like. So I'm going to place this Tanglethorn patch right here. The wizard goes on there just like it does in the regular game, and now we carry out the sprout action, and the sprout action for Tanglethorn is to add 3 sprites to 1 patch next to the wizard. So 3 sprites are going here or here, and let's just add those to that wing bean patch. And that is that, and players will be going back and forth, playing one of their tiles, taking advantage of the sprout action, and that is, in a nutshell, how to play the family mode of Power Plants. So in the solo mode of Power Plants, the human player is going to be going head-to-head with a solo opponent. And for our video, why don't we give that solo opponent a name? Solo Sally, Solo Stew. Solo Stew. I already hate him. Hate that Solo Stew. And what's going to happen is for the human player, their turns are going to be no different than playing the multiplayer version of the game. 2 tiles in hand, place 1 into the garden. Take your actions, take your choice between the sprout and the grow actions as you would normally, and then Solo Stew is going to take their turn. And Solo Stew doesn't have a hand of tiles like we do. Solo Stew is going to reach into the draw bag and pull out a tile, and it's going to follow a number of instructions from the rulebook to put it into the garden. But the 2 ones we're probably going to see most often is that Solo Stew is going to be looking to place its tile so that it's connected to the most other tiles in the garden, and if all of those choices are equal or tied, then it's going to be looking for the opportunity to be touching the most number of tiles of the same type that it drew from the bag. But the other interesting thing is that Solo Stew has his own set of rules. Solo Stew's been sitting in the basement coming up with his own rules for Power Plants, and he showed up to game night with these other rules and nobody said a thing. What do you do in Solo Stew? Let me tell you, Solo Stew's rules are a lot more challenging to play against than the human rules, as we'll see in a few minutes. I'm not going to go through Solo Stew's special homebrew solo rules for you right now. You're going to discover how crazy overpowered they are. All right, so the human player, that's me, is going to take the first turn. I got to make sure I have my 2 tiles in hand. So I've got a Snapjaw and a Honeyleaf tile in hand. And I think Honeyleaf is probably going to be my best option early in the game. So Honeyleaf goes down into the garden. Then the wizard goes down. I'm going to check to see the wizard does not get a bonus sprite on the board. And so now we decide whether we're going to sprout the Honeyleaf tile, or are we going to grow this Honeyleaf as well as this Starflower. I think it probably, yes, it definitely makes sense to do the Honeyleaf sprout action. And so that is add 2 sprites to each patch next to the wizard that has 1 or 0 sprites in it. And both of these have 0. So we've got 2 sprites for me there and 2 sprites for me there. And I think this is probably a good time to point out that you'll notice here that there are both black and white sprites here for Solo Stew. And that's because if Solo Stew ever runs out of sprites, Solo Stew don't care. Solo Stew just takes more sprites. Speaking of which, I draw one more tile to end my turn, and now Solo Stew's gonna take his turn. Solo Stew draws a Starflower. So remember, Solo Stew's first interest, his first priority is to be touching the most number of tiles. And so we already have that opportunity right here. So Solo Stew's patch, I should say, is going to be next to 1, 2, 3 tiles. So we slide that in there. The wizard moves over as it does. And remember, Solo Stew is a cheater, so he doesn't care whether our plant cards say no sprite or yes sprite. Solo Stew says it's always going to be yes. Solo Stew's Starflower special rules are that the rival gains 1 gem for each patch next to the wizard. And so this is the wizard, 1, 2, 3 patches next to the wizard. Solo Stew is going to gain 3 gems. But Solo Stew is not done. Solo Stew also gets 1 gem for each sprite on those patches. And because there are 2 of my sprites on that tile, Solo Stew is going to get 2 more gems. Solo Stew already winning 5-0. Back to my turn. So I've got my Snapjaw and my Wing Bean. Now these are 2 tiles. If you watched my previous video, these are 2 tiles that we didn't see in the sample game that I showed off there. And each of those comes with an extra special ability. So the Snapjaw has a thing that it does called capturing. And if I'm able to capture Solo Stew's sprites, which I sure hope I'm able to, then we actually capture it off of the board and I keep it into my personal supply over here. And I'm sort of keeping Solo Stew's sprites hostage for the end of the game. Because in order for Solo Stew to get their sprites back, they have to pay me one gem for every sprite that I've got. As well, we've got the Wing Bean ability, which actually moves tiles around the field. Back to my turn. I need to choose whether I'm going to play the Snapjaw or I'm going to play this Wing Bean. And I think probably Snapjaw is going to be the way to go. All right, we're going to move Solo Stew's sprites out of the way here because I'm going to play right here. I think we're going to take the Snapjaw's Sprout action. So the Snapjaw Sprout action is to capture 1 rival sprite from a field next to the wizard. And that says from a field next to the wizard. We are going to be targeting this patch here because that's the only place where Solo Stew has a sprite. So I'll capture that and I'll keep it over there. And then I'm going to add 1 sprite to any 1 patch in that field. So in that field, this is the field here. So I think I will try to control this entire field. Hopefully Solo Stew doesn't make up some rules to bite me in the butt. Now, I'm going to draw my second tile. Oh, I've got 2 of the same tile, so that means I can take advantage of the exchange row here. And I love me some Honeyleaf, so I'm gonna take me a Honeyleaf. And that's the end of my turn. Solo Stew is back in business. Solo Stew draws a Tanglethorn. So remember, Solo Stew wants to be next to the most possible patches. But that isn't possible here because most of these spots around the field around the garden I should say, have him touching 2. But his secondary interest is being next to more Tanglethorn patches in this case. he's going to be going right here, I do believe. And then the wizard moves, and Solo Stew always gets a sprite on there regardless of what these cards say. Now, let's look at Solo Stew's special rules for the Tanglethorn. Add 3 sprites to the patch next to the wizard that has the most of my sprites on it. There are no patches next to the wizard with my sprites on it. Then, in that case, it'll prefer the patch with the fewest of its own sprites. And so again, this is the same. There's no Solo Stew sprites on either of these. And so in that case, I do believe we are looking clockwise around the garden. And so in that case, you'll be picking this one, the furthest clockwise patch. So Solo Stew drops 3 sprites. And that's it for Solo Stew. So it's back to me. I've got my honey leaf and I've got my wing bean. Maybe we'll expand the honey leaf field over here. So the wizard moves all the way over there. I do not get a sprite of my own on there. And now I choose whether to activate the honey leaf sprout action on this tile, or I do 2 honey leaf grow actions for those 2 adjacent tiles. We're doing the honey leaf sprout, so that puts 2 of my sprites on that tile from the sprout action. So Solo Stew, you are up. Let's see, Solo Stew. Ooh, Solo Stew's got a wing bean, and so but there is a spot. There is a spot where Solo Stew can touch 3 other tiles. So Solo Stew slides right in there. We move the wizard. Solo Stew gets a sprite onto that tile. And Solo Stew's wing bean special cheater rules are that Solo Stew is going to find the unlocked patch with the most of my sprites on it. And that would be either this one or this one. And I do believe that he likes the lowered numbered tiles, if there's an option. So Solo Stew is going to pull this tile out. And so we're going to move it around clockwise. Pardon me, sprites. We're going to move it around so that it's next to the wizard's tile. Then my sprites are removed from that tile, and Solo Stew just gets to replace them with the same number of their own. And that is just a few turns of the Power Plants solo game. Okay, so there are 4 different difficulty levels in Power Plants. And that difficulty is not played out in the gameplay at all. It's not changed at all, depending on whether you're playing easy, medium hard, or super hard. The difficulty changes are actually made in the way the game is scored. Now, the easy mode is scored exactly the same way you would if you were playing a multiplayer game. And in the game that you were watching just now, I scored that with easy mode when we got to the end, and that score wound up being 24 to 21 for me. So I won by just 3 points in the easy mode. And the super hard mode, in order to win a field against Solo Stew, you're going to need to have control of a field by having the most patches, as well as having more sprites in that field than Solo Stew as well. Kind of crazy, but it's good because you're going to need to get some reps in. You're going to have to really play the game a fair bit to build up your experience to really be able to have a chance to beat Solo Stew in those harder difficulty modes. And I think that just about does it for our look at the 2 variant modes of Power Plants. As I said earlier, this game might still be on Kickstarter at the time you're watching it, so take a look in the description of this video and follow that Kickstarter link to learn more. If you like what we're doing here at Little Big Thumbs, there are 3 ways you can lend us a hand. Number 1 is take the thumb of that hand and give us a like on that video, on this video. Also, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. So if you have a question about the game we're playing, or I don't know, maybe you really like this orange hat, why don't you leave us a comment in the video? We'd love to hear from you. And the last thing you can do is to boom, hit that subscribe button. We'd love to have you along for the ride for all the Little Big Thumbs content we have planned for the future. And with all that being said, whether you've got little players or big players, make sure that you're playing games that make your thumbs go way up. Bye for now.